This is KTN News.
Welcome back. Now, the judiciary, land and police services are the institutions most affected by bribery across the East African region. According to a report released by Transparency International, most of those who give out bribes do it majorly for the purposes of easier access to services.
The survey conducted across Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda and Rwanda places the police, judiciary and land services at the top of the list of institutions prone to bribery. In Kenya, for example, 68% of the respondents felt that the police department leads in bribery, followed closely by the judiciary and land services. However, educational institutions, tax services and huduma centers are the institutions least prone to bribery. Most Kenyans, according to the research, pay bribes as this is the only way to access services, while others pay bribes to hasten service delivery. A smaller percentage, on the other hand, pay bribes to avoid problems with the authorities. And despite increasing media reports of corruption, 62% of Kenyans polled felt that the government is not doing much to fight graft. The script is almost similar in Tanzania, where the police department leads in bribery. Tax services, utilities, and educational services are least prone to the vice in Tanzania. And just like in Kenya, most Tanzanians give out bribes to hasten service delivery, while others feel this is the only way of getting services. However, the election of President John Magufuli seems to have restored faith in the fight against corruption among Tanzanians, with 74% of them feeling the government is doing enough. In Uganda, the police department once again leads in bribery, followed by the judiciary and the land services. Tax services, utilities and local authorities come at the tail end of the list. And just like Kenya, a majority of Ugandans feel their government is doing little to fight corruption. Things are not so different in Rwanda, where again the police department tops the list, with educational institutions and medical services being the least prone institutions to bribery. The survey, however, recommends a raft of measures to curb bribery. These include need for political leaders to demonstrate commitment to prevent and combat corruption in public service, civic education, training and sensitization on the ills of corruption, put in place measures, structures and systems in the public service to enhance corruption detection and prevention, strengthen the capacity of various institutions of governance, consider digitalization of various services as a means to reduce service transaction times, as well as the opportunity for bribery transactions to take place at service delivery points. Janet Chapia, KTN News.
Well, in the studio now, I have the head of programs at Transparency International Kenya, Sheila Masinde, to break down that bribery index report for us. Welcome to the show. Let's perhaps begin with how much went into this report.
So, well, it's a very extensive survey, which we have conducted since 2010. In East Africa, in the entire East African region, in the 5 countries, Uganda, Kenya, Rwanda, Burundi and Tanzania. Though for this year we did not conduct the survey in Burundi because of the security concerns that were happening at the time we went to the field. But the Bribery Index is a survey that we have carried out in Kenya since 2001, first known as the Urban Bribery Index, and then graduating to the Kenya Bribery Index covering the whole nation. Then in 2009, for the first time, we did the 3 countries, Kenya, Uganda and Tanzania, and then 2010, the 5 countries. So a lot of effort goes into it. We spoke to over 8,000 citizens
of each country.
Yeah, of each country of the 4 countries this year. 2,398 in Kenya across 16 counties, and through face-to-face interviews at the household level.
Right.
Yeah.
How would you say then that the results have changed since 2010 when you did all the countries? Kenya is leading right now. Has it always been the same, or do we have a shift in in terms of positions?
Well, largely we've been looking at the sectors. We first started looking at institutions, and then we have now been looking at bribery across the different sectors. And most of the sectors that have ended up being most prevalent in terms of bribery have been security, that is the police, judiciary, lands. We also have been having civil registration, licensing, educational institutions, and tax services. So across the different countries, you'll find that those are the sectors that we found have been most bribery prone.
Right.
Yeah,
and let's take a look at how damning these numbers are, because the report reveals that 68% of Kenyans would pay a bribe to access police services, whether willingly or coerced. And so coming out from this report, it's clear that more Kenyans are paying bribes in a bid to access services.
Yes.
Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so when you ask people, so first of all, one of the question we asked is, I mean, in the last 1 year, have you sought any services from the government? And then if yes, were you asked for any bribe, or did you offer to pay a bribe? And you find now that's where we were able to rank now the police, the judiciary, and lands in Kenya. But even across the 4 East African countries, you'll find that those are the 4 most affected sectors when it comes to bribery. So when we asked them, why did you pay a bribe? And many of them said, I think it's about 42% said that that was the only way I could access the service. And then about 29% said that it was, they wanted to hasten the service delivery process. So, I mean, you find that many people are paying bribes because if they feel like some of the services are not within reach. And I think one of the most striking things for me in the report, in terms of when I looked at the trends, is when you look at gender, age, and residency in terms of who's paying bribes.
Right.
So you'll find that younger people between the age bands of 25 to 34 and 35 to 44 are paying more bribes than the older, comprise a larger proportion of the population paying bribes.
Right.
And then you have more men than women, about 65% men in Kenya paying bribes. And then 60% of people who paid bribes reside in the rural areas, which is saddening because in the rural areas we know the difficulty in terms of accessing services, access to health, access to education, access to water are still very low, and there have often been complaints about service delivery in the rural areas. Now, even with already with the obstacles that are there in the rural area, and now we get this that 60% of people who are paying bribes are from the rural areas, just shows how far services are to the common mwananchi at the grassroots level.
Absolutely.
And then when you look at the age of people also paying bribes, more young people, so that just tells you in terms when you look at the future outlook of corruption. So these are still young people. So as they grow older, is it something that will continue? Especially if they're the ones offering to pay bribes. But also we understand that I think that more young people are paying bribes because they're the ones who are seeking actively, they're the ones who probably driving more, so maybe engaging more with the police, or having to go to hospitals, maybe take their children or the elderly to hospitals, or having to seek education services. So that could be another reason why more young people are paying bribes. But another one, which was also striking, is that people at the lower income levels are the ones paying more bribes. Comprise the larger population of people paying bribes. So people, I think, across the region, people earning about 180, lower than 180 US dollars per month. That's about, say, is it 18,000 or 20,000 Kenya shillings per month are the people who are paying
the
more
most
bribes.
Well, let's focus on the fact that these are bribes especially given to access public services. What is the amount, you'd say, the average amount of bribes being paid by these Kenyans?
So, we have one of the indicators we have is a average size of bribe, which looks at the amount people are paying to access services. So when you look at our index in that indicator, we had, for instance, in the judiciary recording the highest size of bribe at about 14,000. And then there was, after judiciary, I think there was civil registration at 12,300. And then coming next was lands, 8,900. That was the average size of bribe that was reported in our survey. Yeah, and then when you look at the share of, we also questioned the issue of share of bribe, which how much bribes are going to each sector. So of all the people that reported, we had about all the bribes that were reported, a third of them went into were paid to the police
From the police service.
Yes.
All right, that's rather interesting. But I also understand that this survey also showed the most incorruptible public institutions, so to speak, and Huduma Center was one of those. Talk to us about how you arrived at that.
Well, I don't know how to say incorruptible, because Huduma Center was 10th in the aggregate index. I think scoring about 10 point something, 10.6. But it's really more to say that Huduma Center was the least adversely mentioned in that list. It doesn't mean that there's no corruption going on, because they still scored 10.6. In the aggregate index, right. Meaning about 10.6 people say that, and even in likelihood and prevalence, they're still listed. I think at about same score, 10, meaning that, was it 6 or 10? But saying that there's still an amount of people, a proportion of people who say that they were asked for bribes or the likes. But when you compare it to the police, for instance, in the aggregate index, police, I think, scoring about 83 in Kenya, police in Kenya, then compare with Huduma at 10. So, I mean, that's a stark contrast. So, basically, I think what we'd say about Huduma Center, my own interpretation is that there's probably less corruption in the Huduma centers, because first of all, they have an open plan.
Right.
It's an open plan of office system. So you go in there, probably chances, if someone is asking you for a bribe, they'll be ill at ease, because, I mean, you're out in the open. And then one of the key things is digitization of services. You know, most services in the Huduma Center are digitized, and there are clear charters of service. You know that I'm asking for this service, and it takes this amount of days, right. Or it costs this much. So there's less there are less opportunities for corruption.
So, would you say then, having done this for about a decade or so, is the corruption level, the corruption index in the different institutions rising, or is it increasing? I mean, is it decreasing rather?
Well, I think in some of the years we've seen a seesaw where, for instance, like I think in 2014, the previous time that we did this index, the score of the police had slightly gone down. Right. But then now this year it has gone up by about 15.5 points to 83. So. Yeah, from 60.
Something happening.
Yeah, there's something happening. But then also that's also across 3 years. But again, when you look at one of the indicators that will tell you whether corruption again is rising or increasing in the country is just the perception of Kenyans. I think the perception of Kenyans has more or less remained the same. We've been getting about 80 or so percent of people who feel that the level of corruption in Kenya is still high. This year, I think we polled at about 83% of Kenyans who say that corruption is still high, compared to 81% in 2014. Right. Well, I compared that to Tanzania, where the perception has really gone down. With majority of them saying that corruption is just medium or low, and the number of people who are saying it's high has really gone down. But I think that's also because of what has been happening in the country. They're seeing more action from the highest level, from the president, acting against corruption, taking very tough decisions against corruption, and people have been found to be corrupt. And that, of course, raises the perception of people that there's something happening in the fight against corruption. I think in Kenya, because we see, okay, there are all these many corruption scandals coming up by day, no action, we're not seeing people going to jail, we're not seeing our assets or resources lost to corruption being recovered. So, of course, now people still think, okay, the level of corruption is still high, and, that kind of people expressing that kind of frustration.
And that being said, this report is also blaming the rising cases of corruption on the poor performance of the bodies mandated in fighting corruption, that is the EFCC, the Auditor General, the Office of the President. Why is that then, and what recommendations does Transparency International have?
It's all about action. People need to see action. We need to see action from these authorities. Though I wouldn't say that they were the perception was that that they've performed poorly. It was more average, starting from the president, for the EFCC and the Office of the Auditor General. I think the result we got was about ranging from 2.5 to 2.8 for those three institutions. So I wouldn't call it that people say it's low. It's more or less, they'd say they ranked it as more average. But I think it's because people want to see action. Yeah, as I gave you the explanation of Tanzania. Right. And because when you ask people, why do you think that the corruption is high, or why do you think corruption is likely to increase in the next 12 months, they'll tell you, well, it's because there's more corruption scandals coming up. There are lots of corruption scandals in Kenya, and because nothing is happening to the corrupt. But you see, in Tanzania, people are telling you, yeah, I can see something happening. So that tells it's just all about action, action, action. We have laws. They need to be, these laws need to be enforced. And the people that have been found corrupt, as I said earlier, need to be taken to, we need to have convictions.
Right.
It's not just about them being taken to court, but also those prosecution processes actually ending up in convictions, because that is the strongest measure that we are succeeding in the fight against corruption. People being punished for it, and money that has been lost being recovered.
Right. Now, having compared perceptions, especially between Kenya and Tanzania, what people think, how would you compare the rate of corruption within the different countries?
Well, we didn't do a ranking of, okay, Uganda comes one, Kenya comes second. We didn't do that this year, but I think we can just maybe do an interpretation of the trends. Right. Particularly in terms of how the different sectors score. But as I said, for the three countries, I mean, for Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, we said that the police, judiciary, and the lands are most affected. But then you can go and then look at in terms of the corruption perceptions. When you look at the corruption perceptions, 83% of Kenyans saying that corruption is still high, and I think about even when you look at majority of Kenyans still feel that it will increase. When you ask them, will it increase in the next 12 months? They said, yes, it will increase, and they gave various reasons. They said, yeah, one, because at that point when we were doing it, it was during, at the beginning of the year when we did the survey, and they said it was one, because of the elections, and two, because there's no action against corrupt people. So again, this is that perception that corruption will still increase. So more or less, Kenya and Uganda, you could see the same trends in terms of the corruption perception levels, but then Tanzania and Rwanda, the corruption perception levels were a bit better in terms of less of them think that that corruption is high in the country. A lot of them are very optimistic, especially we traditionally, I think the Rwandans have been very optimistic in the fight against corruption. But this time we have the Tanzanians saying that yes, there's less corruption in the country, and we feel that even in the coming 12 months, we'll even see a reduced levels of corruption. So I would say there's higher optimism in the fight against corruption in Rwanda and Tanzania, but it's not the same for Kenya and Uganda.
Well, let's hope that your recommendation of action from the concerned bodies will be taken into account. Many thanks for speaking to us. Sheila Masinde is the head of programs at Transparency International Kenya, that has brought out a report, a damning report really detailing that the judiciary, lands, as well as the police services are most affected by bribery in the country. Well, it is now 52 minutes past the hour. Let's take a look at our question of the day. We're asking you today, how has your Friday changed as we wait the outcome of the Supreme Court? How has your Friday changed as we wait the decision of the Supreme Court? And Kevin Kamau here says nothing has changed. Still waking up early to get to work with an early morning dose of prayer for our nation. And we also have Evelyn Casina here saying, my plans haven't changed at all. At the end of the day, life must go on. I did my bit at the ballot. And we also have Korir Lenny here saying, I'm in town now. I can see heavy security. And to me, it has not changed anything. We are waiting for the verdict. So do keep the conversation going on social media. The hashtag is Kivumbi 2017. KT News will be covering that decision by the Supreme Court in a way only we can. My name is Michelle Ngele. Many thanks for staying with us for the past 4 hours on the early morning edition.